All right. And once again, I want to welcome everybody to today's session from all over the globe. We have a worldwide session here today to talk about all things management consulting. My name is Mike with ClearAdmit. ClearAdmit is a really great resource website and applicant community for folks who are going off to their MBA. So if you are planning and you're in the planning stages to attend an MBA program someday, please come back to clearadmit.com. We have a lot of great resources available for folks going through the process, updates on interview invites and decisions and all this fun stuff, and chat rooms and places where people can hang out and talk about their application process as they go through it. Definitely enough about us. We're not here to talk about ClearAdmit today. We're here to talk about some other really great things. So I want to introduce our panelists. We have Chandler Arnold, who has an MBA from Stanford GSB, been a guest lecturer at Columbia Business School, as well as Yale SOM. And has some private sector experience as the CEO of Experience Early Learning and some strategy work with the Coca-Cola Company and consulting with BCG, Boston Consulting. And today Chandler's here with Stacy Blackman Consulting as a senior consultant. Welcome, Chandler.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And we'll talk a little bit more about Stacy Blackman Consulting as well as we move through the program. I also want to introduce Erica Suesserman, who started her career at BCG, same place as Chandler. Did you guys overlap? Did we talk about that?
Chandler, we did not, I don't think.
We just missed each other, unfortunately.
There you go. So BCG as well, another Boston Consulting group, and did some summer internship consulting hiring for the Atlanta and Miami offices. I will not say E-Town down, I just did. And also managed the recruiting process for several schools all over BCG North America for the undergraduates, the MBAs, and also advanced degree candidates. Erica is a representative from my consulting offer, where she works now. And Erica, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, guys.
Awesome. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chandler. I'm going to sit in the background and manage some chat stuff, but I'll be back later. Chandler, take it from here.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thrilled to be here. And Stacy Blackman Consulting loves to have these conversations and connect with folks around these questions. And so excited to spend some time with Erica today, who's such an expert in all of these things from kind of both sides of the table. Erica, why don't we start with kind of a general question and then get a little bit more specific. When you think about describing the management consulting career path, recognizing that there are lots of people on the call that are sort of different places in the process, how do you describe the path? How do you help people understand if consulting is for them or not? Yeah,
a couple different things. So firstly, you got to decide if you like to work long hours. Okay. So there's some like key bucketed items where you can say consulting would not be for you. If you don't like to work hard, if you don't like receiving feedback, if you don't like to travel, and especially if you don't like working in teams. If those are all things that you can either push through or you do enjoy, then consulting would be a great career path for you. And one of the benefits of consulting is you can start your career in consulting at any point in time. So you don't necessarily have to be a first-year MBA. You don't have to have already had work experience. There's a variety of different times and when you can actually enter in.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And, you know, it's been a few years since I was management consultant myself. And I know that certainly my colleagues and I talked a lot about work-life balance. And I know I get a lot of questions about that from applicants to business school that I'm working with who are thinking about these fields. How do you talk to folks about work-life balance vis-a-vis the consulting path? And, you know, is there a difference in terms of work-life balance at top firms?
Yeah, so this is a really tough question. And this is like one of those key phrases, like, I want really good work-life balance. Like any job, I'd say actually more so than in consulting, you really have to commit time and effort and energy into kind of putting your head down and doing the work up front, okay? And sometimes that means dedicating long amount of hours. So I'm sure you know this, but McKinsey, Bain, and BCG aren't necessarily known for good work-life balance. I think the higher up you go and the more you establish yourself and have a long-term career within those firms, the more you can solidify and set those boundaries. But in all the firms, it's a grind out the first year or so, I'd say, and they're pretty well known for that. What I would say is that we're seeing a little bit more flexibility as you start to specialize. So let's say for Deloitte, for example, if you're in life sciences, I would say that maybe you have like 5 to 15 hours less than a traditional like generalist at MBB. But I wouldn't say there's a lot of flex there. It totally depends. The other thing that it's dependent on, you can probably speak about this, Chandler, is it's not necessarily like work-life balance isn't necessarily dictated by firm, but it's really about project and the team that you're staffed on. And you can probably speak a little bit more to that than I could.
No, I completely agree with you on that point, Erica. I know when I started at BCG, I kind of felt like there were three things that my colleagues and I thought about in terms of the projects that we wanted to get staffed on. And when I started, I would have probably ranked those: sector 1, location 2, and team 3. And the longer I worked at BCG, that ranking actually inverted. To me, it became most important to think about what team I was working on, who the partner was, who the project lead was, because you develop your own relationships, your own styles, and you kind of click with some folks more than others. So that became the most important thing to me. Actually, the project that I was on for about 9 months was in the cement industry, not an area that I had a great deal of previous experience in or candidly interest in, but it was a project in Mexico, super interesting location, really great team, amazing partner. And it was one of the best projects that I've worked on. And going in, if I had been judging it just by the sector, I would have not paid attention at all. So I think kind of freeing yourself of like, what is sexy, what's not judging a book by a cover made a big difference for me. And thinking very carefully about the work style and sort of working relationships that you're interested in makes a outsized difference, I think, in quality of life.
Yeah.
Erica, I know that things have changed since I was doing consulting. And I feel like even in the past couple of years with the pandemic and other things, there've been some hiring strategy shifts at some of these firms. What changes do you see underway in terms of hiring process? What things might be different when folks are thinking about applying now versus even a couple of years ago? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so this is hard and it's ever changing, right? So when COVID happened, one of the major things was flexibility. So it's funny because consulting is known for like having to travel Monday through Thursday and all this. When COVID happened, firms found a way to make it work via Zoom. So what we're seeing now is a lot more flexibility in some of these roles where you don't necessarily need to travel to the client site. It saves money, but also it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Like a lot of people like the work from home aspect, but a lot of people want to go into consulting because you get that face-to-face interaction with your team. You do get the huge travel perks and benefits. Like I remember like credit card points, that was one of those benefits that you miss out on now. So that's kind of one of those things that we've seen shift for the major firms. The expectation should be, and will probably always be, you travel to the client. It's kind of like the prestige of working for, MBB. But I would say some of the trends that I've seen shift even from when I was there is hiring people that have maybe less of a traditional background. So, when you went into consulting, it was just traditional MBA programs. You have a target list of schools. And that was kind of the expectation. If you didn't go to a target school, then good luck. But we've started to see that shift happen where you want to hire people with more of a non-traditional background, or even I'd say one of the bigger trends now is hiring people that, are in an MBA that have some kind of specialization or a couple of years of work experience, whether it's, specifically in ops or something else. As we see just the industries shifting and just our world changing, there's more need for specialized roles. And I'm sure you guys have felt that on the job market as well. Like there's huge hiring trends going on right now and it's on fire. And so we're less strict with just the traditional campus route and more open to having experienced hire candidates coming through the pipeline. When I was at BCG, I think maybe we hired like one experienced hire a month, maybe. And that just sounds outrageous to me. Like that was for the entire Atlanta office. It was just, it's crazy now because that is the majority of these pipelines are for more specialized roles. And then the other thing is there's a lot of emphasis for campus recruiting. hiring first-year MBAs. I'm not sure if somebody would probably have that question later on or not. But the reason is because firms want to invest in their summer internship class. It's just the easiest way to solidify, just strong full-time classes. It's an easy way to get offers, get yourself familiarized, in a 10-week, however long the summer internship is, and a great way to gauge whether or not somebody's going to be a good fit for the firm and also a good fit into consulting. So those would be a couple of the trends that I've seen, but I'd be interested to hear if you've seen or recognize anything else.
Well, I couldn't agree more with all of what you said. And I'd like to just highlight one piece of that. I feel like, it's probably 20 years ago that I was going through this application process, and I was coming from a non-traditional background, from a social enterprise background, and I definitely felt like kind of a fish out of water. I'm also a member of the LGBT community, and so I was kind of nervous about both aspects of that with regard to my candidacy. And a friend of mine pulled me aside and said, hey, you're thinking about this the opposite way. You should embrace those two aspects of who you are, because they get so many people that sort of look like, forgive my shorthand, kind of cookie cutter cutouts, just like everyone else. You want to lean into what makes you different, what makes you unique, be vulnerable, be authentic, be bold, and that is what can make you stand out. And I think that both of those elements actually helped differentiate me in my own application process. And I now know, looking back, that the hiring managers in BCG at the time, this was confidential then, but it's not confidential now, they had a big pro bono sort of corporate nonprofit project coming up, and they were specifically looking for someone with some elements of my background. Now, I never knew that and wouldn't have known that, but thank goodness I highlighted that when I was applying. And I feel like that's definitely true if you come from a hardcore sciences background, if you come from an engineering background, if you have unique work experience, if you have a unique element of your personhood, lean into that. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a great transition to sort of opening up to questions from other folks, because we could sit here and talk all day, but we really want to make this beneficial for you all. And I know one question came in, Erica, while I was talking, one of your previous comments about something about like not going into consulting if you don't want to receive feedback. And the question is feedback at consulting firms different from other corporate positions? Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So feedback is huge. And I will say specifically for BCG, you can attest to this as well. If you cannot take feedback, then good luck in consulting. The worst thing you can do is go into any job and assume that you know everything about it. And so even more so in consulting, you want to be somebody who is willing to learn and grow. And I can't speak for other jobs outside of consulting necessarily, but I know, this is about consulting. And so what's most relevant is knowing that is a huge part of how you're assessed in the interview process, your coachability, your willingness to receive, and not just receive that feedback, but also implement those changes and those necessary like points of growth from your team, from your partner. It's a huge point of it's like one of the most desirable aspects of a candidate would be the willingness to grow, learn, and receive and take feedback. So hopefully that answers that question appropriately.
Yeah. I completely agree with that too. I think, and this is true, it's probably true more broadly, it's certainly true about the business school sort of collaborative team experience. This is true in a lot of other industries. So I don't think we're saying that consulting is the only group that gives candid feedback, but it's especially a team-oriented life. And if you are, like a good sense of humor goes a long way, a thick skin goes a long way, a mindset that is open to improve and learn, all of those things in the kind of EQ, emotional intelligence side, in fact, are things that your interviewers will be screening for consciously or unconsciously as you go through that process. Well, Mike, let's take some other questions from the audience. I see that we've got some coming up in the Q&A here. One is, what if I want to pursue a career in management consulting with no previous experience in consulting, with some work in other categories? What would you say, Erica, for folks that are thinking about, and I will say I moved to consulting with no previous experience, but Erica, what would you say about that?
Your chance right now is as good as anybody else's. So like we were talking about before, some like different hiring trends that we're seeing. It doesn't matter if you have relevant work experience or none. So for me specifically, I just worked with a client that was a former college football coach. I worked with a former history teacher. It's all about how you can showcase your skill set and your ability to solve problems actually in a case interview. Any former interviewer will tell you, the further away you get from your education, and like, let's say you get through the interview process, I don't care what your GPA was. I don't care what your major was. I care about, can you actually do this job? Can you solve this problem well? Obviously a variety of other things as well, right? Like, can you be client, can you be presented to a client? Can you communicate? Things like that. But ultimately the goal is, would you make a good consultant? And you prove that by a case interview and your fit interview as well. So the lack of work experience is irrelevant. And there's a lot of other things and ways that you can differentiate yourself in an application. Recruiters take, a completely holistic approach to assessing whether or not you would predictably do well in interviews before they waste their time. And one of the ways that they're able to do that now is via these digital assessments, which I'm sure everybody's heard about. When I was at BCG, and I'm sure when you were there, Chandler, they didn't have those things because, again, it was a very structured, traditional recruiting.
Computers were still new at the time.
They were so new. In fact, I remember actually printing out resumes and like highlighting people who I thought were good. Like, it's crazy. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I had that kind of like leverage, but that's how it was done back then. And at some point in time, when you're working with, firms as big as BCG, they have rules in place, and we only want to recruit from Yale. We only want to recruit from Duke. So they thankfully broadened the scope quite a bit and started creating these digital assessments, which is basically there to give people who might very well have a very valuable skill set, but they're being overlooked because of X, Y, and Z. Lack of relevant work experience, no internship experience, maybe a lower GPA. All of those things shouldn't prevent somebody who's extremely, high skill level or can solve problems or go through casing to prevent them from actually getting the interview. So I will say, like, kudos to these firms for finally shifting and being able to create some, scalable tests that can give people who might not otherwise get reviewed the opportunity to show that they have those skills to actually make it in consulting.
I completely agree, Erica. And I see a couple other questions in the Q&A that touch on this. One from Ryan and one from an anonymous attendee who asked, if as a career pivot from sales, what are the concerns that a consulting firm might have? Ryan asked, as an active duty military, I'll be a non-traditional candidate. How can I best compete? And I'll add one note to that. And then Erica, I want to see what you say. I think, wherever you're coming from, I think a good exercise to go through yourself is to think about, in the worst case scenario, what is it about my background that might give people pause or questions or concerns? So for me, I was coming from a nonprofit, and I thought that they might think that I was just all about, I don't know, trust falls and poetry readings or something, and that I didn't have substantive analytic strategic experience. So actually, in one of my interviews, someone's not at BCG, but they were like, you've been saving the world for all these years. What makes me think that you're going to want to drive hard on reducing costs to increase profits at a corporation that's, not making plastic cups or whatever?
Yeah.
And I had a really good answer for that when I applied. I talked about, well, really, I have been in a strategy role, and I've had an outside set of experiences because it was a nonprofit, and these elements of my background sort of give me unique insight into strategy in these ways, and here's how it will transfer. And then conversely, to think about, from your own experience, what is uniquely special and relevant. So Ryan, to your question about active duty military, my goodness, so many of my colleagues, both in business school and at BCG, came from the military, and they all had tremendous leadership experience, tremendous team experience. They were good at like working with senior people. They were good at managing people below them. That's a really robust and powerful set of skills that I would advise you to shine the spotlight on during the application. But Erica, what would you add to that as people think about how to best position themselves relevant to their past experience in whatever industry that might be?
Yeah, that's hard. So, specifically like with veterans, that's a diversity group, and another hiring trend is like hiring diverse groups. So if you were a veteran and a part of the LGBTQ community, then that's what we like to call a unicorn. And if you happen to be a female, anytime we find candidates like that, you're super unique, right? But it's taking your experiences and seeing like what kind of impact or accomplishments did you have in that non-relevant experience. So in sales, right? Like being able to prove that you actually had some kind of impactful movement or shift in whatever experience that was. Because then the assumption is you can bring that same impact or skill set to consulting, right? You have to have a love of problem solving. But you have to show that there was a problem that existed that you actually helped, implement a solution for, because those skill sets are the same. You might not relate like sales to consulting, or being a veteran or in the military to something with consulting. And there's going to be gaps there, right? Like for veterans, depending on where, what level you're at, maybe it's a lack of teaming, or maybe it's more of those soft skills, those interpersonal skills that you have to work on. And that's what, you can get coached on those things, right? But ultimately the value is bringing a different perspective to the table. As somebody who's in the military, I can't relate. I have no idea what your experiences were. So when you bring that to the client, and you're able to put that perspective in a team, then what you're giving the client is a variety of perspectives. And not everybody's a white male that just graduated from an MBA program with the same, finance background or whatever. Same thing with sales. Even if you were a server in a restaurant, right? All of those things, you can have some kind of relatable skill set and attribute, those skills to something that has to do with consulting. It's a matter of being able to find those.
Yep. Another question from the audience. Does performance in the application games and tests for pre-MBA programs like McKinsey Access and BCG Unlock, how does that affect future recruiting outcomes?
So that's a good question. So I would say just because you get rejected, maybe the first time you apply, if you're a first year MBA and you want to go, you get rejected for summer internship recruiting and you want to do full-time, that doesn't hinder you from applying again. Summer internship recruiting is extremely competitive for first years. So just keep that in mind. Don't get discouraged by that process. The best thing you could do is go in, submit another assessment, and show growth, right? Obviously, like worst case scenarios, you fail again, and you can see where your gaps are, right? Like maybe it's like some issue with quant or analytical skills. Those are things that you can tangibly work on and potentially recruit as an experienced hire after your MBA, because there's something that's missing there.
And Erica, I want to piggyback on that with a question from Nancy, who asked, how can I increase my strategy and analytics skills? Can you recommend a certificate or class that I can take to strengthen my consulting hard skills? And I'll add one thing to that, and then Erica would love to hear what you say. I came from a liberal arts background. I was a history and literature. I focused on social change and American history and literature. Did not take a single math class in college. So I was especially concerned about the case questions in my interviews, because I was a great storyteller. I felt like I had a lot of other assets, but that was something I had less experience with. My brain didn't naturally work that way. And the first takeaway was, someone said to me, look, it's not actually about getting the right answer. It's about showing these people how you think, methodically, analytically, out loud. So that was a big light bulb moment for me. And honestly, in school at Stanford, some friends and I joined the consulting club, and some friends and I just spent a lot of time doing mock case interview questions with each other. And there are plenty of books out there that you can get with those, or your MBA career management office can probably share those with you. There are things online. I'm sure people here have additional resources about that, but really just practicing those. And I would say practicing them out loud, not just in your head with friends. So we'd have like a couple friends and I would get together, we'd open a bottle of wine and we would just practice those with each other, and hearing how they thought out loud helped me so much, and vice versa. So that's a little bit different than your question about a specific course or certificate. And I'll invite Erica to add on to that. But I would also say that practicing out loud with friends makes a big difference. But what would you add, Erica?
I absolutely agree. So it really is all about practice, and it sounds like a cliche answer, but think about any other skill you're trying to get better at. It's about practicing. Now, who you practice with is also extremely important. So if I wanted to learn how to become a master chef, I'm not going to shadow my husband because he doesn't cook very well. I would want to shadow a master chef. So that would be a piece of feedback that I would give. I'm sure there's resources out there that help with that. I know specifically at my consulting offer, that's why we exist, is to help coach one-on-one for those certain skills. But any specific courses I can't necessarily recommend. And exactly what Chandler said, they want to know how you think. And that's why the case interview process exists and is structured the way that it is, because they want to know what you're thinking, how you're processing your solution. And then obviously, errors in your ultimate end result matters as well, right? I've seen people get declined from interviews because they missed a number. I'm sure it's a variety of other factors as well. So it's a very holistic approach, but making sure that you are practicing with people who are better or more experienced than you will ultimately help you grow.
Question from William. What factors should we be considering when trying to decide which office to apply to? For example, Atlanta versus Denver, et cetera. Is it strictly a matter of picking a geographic location we want to live in, or is there more at play, like sector, et cetera? I'll offer 2 cents and then I'll turn it over to the expert. I do think that geography matters, and this isn't rocket science, but it's kind of a numbers game. Like when I was at BCG, at Stanford, for example, everyone in my class wanted to work in California-based companies. So there's a whole bunch of Stanford grads applying to one specific office. Whereas, when I applied from Stanford to the Atlanta office of BCG, I might have been the only person from my class at Stanford applying to the Atlanta office. And at that time, the Atlanta office had fewer applications than, let's say, the New York or the San Francisco office. So I think in some ways it is a numbers game. Now, you don't want to apply to a place that you don't want to live, at least for a summer. But I do think that competition is often less at less robust offices, though the experience there is just as good, and in some ways maybe even better, because you might learn more on a smaller team. But that's just one point of view. Erica, what would you say about that?
Yeah, so location preference absolutely matters. I'll go over to like more of the industry sector side. So if you're coming through applications with actual specialized work experience, then absolutely, like, you want to apply to like the Northeast if your focus is, in medicine or whatever the case is, right? Or if you have like a life science focus, West Coast would be really hot for that. So just keep that in mind. If you have valuable work experience that is in a specialized area, you have higher chances of getting, reviewed by the areas that are desiring that kind of skill set. For anybody that's going through a campus process, area and location preference absolutely matters. But I will say, what happens is each office, so like let's say Atlanta, actually sets hiring targets for schools So like for Stanford, I could say, I don't get that many applicants and I don't expect to get that many applicants. So I'm actually going to only allot one of my hiring goals for Stanford. If I get 5 applicants from Stanford and I only have one hiring goal that I've allotted, well, then Chandler has a pretty, good chance of getting in. However, in West Coast offices, they might have 25 slots, right, for that they're allot for Stanford. And so it's kind of like a double way of thinking about things. The best thing you can do, again, very cliche response, is to pick the location in which you want to live, but also considering your chances. So that's something we discuss with you at my consulting offer, is more about like, if your ideal location to live is New York City, but you go to a non-traditional school down in Texas, what's your reasoning of wanting to be in New York? If your whole family's from New York, that makes sense, right? But if it's just like, it's a cool city, New York is not going to necessarily value you over a very strong pipeline that they have coming from Ivy League schools, okay? Or people who have more specialized work experience. So take that in mind. And we always tell people to weight their location preferences very thoughtfully and strategically. Because if Chandler applied to Atlanta and I already had a Stanford grad or somebody that was at Stanford that was applying, that is more valuable to me personally than Chandler, I just rejected him and now he's out of the application process. And that stinks. The likelihood of your second choice office preference reviewing you is, relatively strong based off of how you weight them. And then your third office preference that you list, I say nobody likes to be last licks. I haven't seen any third office preference take a candidate that's listed them. So basically, allot them nothing. Really think about your 2 first locations very strategically.
Have a question from Rahul. Are part-time MBAs or one-year MBAs looked at in a negative light when someone wants to recruit for consulting?
Absolutely not. I would say back in the day, yes. It was just kind of like there was more whys behind it. But now, again, like I said, hiring trend is hiring people with, diverse backgrounds and maybe, like a less structured educational program or even structured MBA. I've hired off people from part-time MBAs or one-year programs all the time.
Here's another question, slightly different category. What would the WLB project management and intake career progression compare to investment banking? So what skills would you think are most transferable for someone wanting to switch from iBanking to consulting?
Yeah, I see a lot of people come from IB into consulting because they were bored. So I think a lot of the transferable skills would be, again, problem solving, teaming, putting the client first. There's a lot of variation in the work you're doing. So again, the closeness in proximity that you're working to people in a team that you're staffed on a project with, like you're spending 14, sometimes 16 hours a day with these people, making sure that you really like them. But other than that, what I see is similar skill set, different work, and mostly the desire to kind of get a variety in project work. And then I would say, I personally actually haven't seen anybody go from consulting to IB, which is funny, right? But maybe you might be able to answer that a little bit better than me.
Yeah, I've definitely seen people move both ways. They do have similarities in sort of high intensity, analytic and quantitative rigor, client ready work. So I agree with you. And I've seen some friends move both ways. And just to double click on another point that you made, I can't emphasize enough that the people who are making these hiring decisions and the partners that are running these projects, they want super smart people who are going to deliver great work product. But basically everyone that makes it to the interview process, from my perspective, is super smart and can probably deliver a really good work product. So the other thing I think that's really important is, what is the experience like of working with this person? You're going to be working long hours together. I mean, like we went on this sort of European series of presentations. We were in like 5 countries over 3 days. It's all, airports, hotel lobbies, hotel conference rooms. We were in France, but I didn't see any of the Eiffel Tower. But it was such an intense experience that we talked a lot about how if any person on the team had been difficult to travel with, difficult to work with, it would have, it just the project would not have gotten done. And I think that that's something that people are screening for as they think. They're asking themselves, what would it be like to work with this person at 1 a.m. after a long, stressful day? And you want them to think that it would be great, not just neutral, but additive to work with you.
Yeah.
Question from Parth, does a previous experience in tech assist in management consulting?
I wouldn't say like assist. I think if you're trying to go into tech consulting, it can help you, but otherwise you're evaluated the same as everybody else.
And that does bring up another good point. If you have an interest, in addition to sort of Bain, McKinsey, BCG, there are also a lot of other fantastic firms that do specialize in certain areas, like Dahlberg in the social impact category. And so I think to an extent, we're talking about these sort of main 4 firms. But if you have an experience in tech and you're wanting to go into tech consulting, or if you have an experience in social impact and want to go into social impact consulting, I think 90% of what we're saying is still applicable.
Totally.
But if you, I think if you have an experience in tech and you're applying to a McKinsey, you want to say something like, these experiences in tech will be very helpful for tech projects, and these experiences in tech gave me these skills and these analytic abilities that will be helpful in any project. So I think that's the only kind of added spin I would put on it. And then you should be prepared for that follow-up question, which is, okay, well, tell me specifically what you learned in your tech job that applies to non-tech situations. And you can have an answer ready for that about project management or fast-paced work environments or demanding client, whatever it is. But I think thinking through those questions makes sense. So I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. And Keith asks, is a low GPA or a low GMAT GRE score a hindrance if one wants to recruit for management consulting?
Well, I would say, how low is your GPA? Because at some point in time, yes, there's not like a strict cutoff, because we don't just look at your GPA. And then same thing with test scores. If you really are not good at math, I'm not saying this from me, I'm saying this from every interview I've ever spoken with. If you are just like not skilled at math, you can't get better. Consulting will not work for you. You can't go through a case interview without having solid math skills. And only, like if you practice and practice and practice, you're just not getting better. It's like, I could practice at basketball. It's just not going to work for me. I'm 5'2". So just keep that in mind. But GPA is less of a hindrance, I'd say, because I just think it's a very outdated way of assessing whether or not somebody is going to make a great consultant. There's a lot of other factors that come into play. And what I like to tell people is consider your resume like a Tinder profile. Okay. It's just like kind of like the nuts and bolts of who you are. As you're networking with people, that's really where you're like dating. It's a two-way street. They have to love you. You have to love them. If somebody falls in love with you in a conversation and maybe you have a lower GPA, they will make excuses for you as to why you can get into the interview process. And then it's at that point in time that you have to have the quant skills to actually get through. And that's totally, that's up to you whether you push through that or not. But there's a variety of things and ways that you can get yourself past, low test scores. Maybe you didn't study, and that for me, that was a long time ago, right? And then a low GPA, again, life happens. And I think now these firms are coming to terms with realizing like, yeah, why are we not letting some of these really highly skilled candidates come through because of an old or outdated, GPA? So just keep that in mind.
I totally agree. And we see a lot of that at Stacy Blackman Consulting as well with regard to MBA admissions processes. One thing that I would say, I love your point about they will make excuses for you, or they will justify if they want to. So I think let's say you have a low GPA, you should make it as easy as possible for the firm to understand why you have a low GPA and to give them a reason not to worry about it. For example, I was working with an applicant last year who suffered a head injury in a football game at college, right? And then he had to stay out, missed a lot of classes, he didn't withdraw, his grade suffered, had a lower GPA. And if you just looked at his GPA, it would seem low. But then if he wrote a little paragraph that said, hey, I had an injury, I'm fully recovered. Here's the doctor's note that explains that I'm fully recovered. And I had a financial constraint. I couldn't afford to withdraw. So I made the decision to push through, even though I knew that it would mean that I was stretched thin with my rehab and classes, but I chose to do it for these reasons. And, this is me owning that experience. And let me tell you that I came back the next semester and I knocked it out of the park. So I think that, explaining why that number might be lower, offering a good justification for it, never placing the blame on anyone else, owning your own experience, but then pointing to a reason that they don't need to worry about that. Like, next semester's grades were great, or, I've been working for 2 years at a top firm where analytics are super important and I've gotten gold stars. Like, if you could then talk to the recruiting coordinator or someone and help them to understand that story, a lot of times they can carry your water. But Erica's totally right. Ultimately, when you get, that might get you into the interview, but then when you get in the interview, you've got to perform. So Nancy asked, I currently have a bachelor's in global management with 2+ years of work experience. Should I go back to school and get an MBA in order to go into management consulting?
That's a total personal preference. If you want to go back to school, I always say campus gives you more of a structured recruiting process. If you don't want an MBA and you don't want to go back to school, then don't do it. And I would still recruit with your experience, make it relevant.
Yeah. Someone asked, what would you say is the most important skill to show during the internship in order to get a full-time job offer? No pressure, Erica.
Oh gosh, I don't know during summer internship. That's a good question. I would say overall, there's a couple things that I would say, I wouldn't pinpoint just to the summer internship, but first one would be going back to my first point, again, being redundant, but I can't, emphasize this enough, is basically being able to learn, grow, accept, take feedback and grow from it. And similar to, Chandler's example of someone getting a head injury at a football game, yada, yada. It's about how you bounce back from that. And we actually would review transcripts to see what did your next semester look like? So in your summer internship, it's not like you can't make mistakes, but it is a matter of, owning up to those mistakes, being humble, and then what are the shifts that they see during your midpoint review or your midsummer review. You'll know exactly where you stand. They tell you pretty upfront. If you are, not on trajectory to getting a full-time offer, they will tell you, and you have a very short amount of time to make those shifts. So I think it's all about the bounce back there. And then the other thing is being a part of a team. So I don't like saying the fluffy stuff, but likability is huge. And I think, your emotional intelligence plays a key part in your summer internship success. The summer internship classes are relatively small. If you're that odd man out that is just not getting along with people, it's not a good fit for the firm, you will not get a full-time offer. One bad apple can ruin the entire bunch. And so I would say those two things, taking and receiving feedback and making sure that you're implementing those changes, and then being a team player are two of the biggest things where I've seen people see extreme success, and then also been the downfall of their full-time offers as well.
I totally agree. I think, intelligence, hardworking, good attitude, working to make sure that the team and your supervisors succeed, asking how you can be helpful, I think being humble, not being when people are defensive in these situations, there's just not time to work through that sort of character challenge, and good attitude goes a real long way.
Yeah.
And I would also say finding an unofficial mentor during your summer experience makes a big, and during your full-time experience makes a big difference. Some firms assign you a mentor, but as a gay person, I know I kind of sought out a gay mentor unofficially who sort of took me under his wing, and that was super helpful. Like they brought me to like affinity group events, so if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, if you are a gay person, if you are a military person, or if you're a computer science person seeking out another computer science person who's been there several years, that can make a really big difference because they might be sort of more dialed into some challenges and opportunities that you might be encountering and can help give you guidance about project leaders or partners that are particularly good to work with, given that background, project leaders or partners that you might want to avoid that, and they might tell you something that the recruiting manager kind of might not be able to tell you in sort of an off the record conversation. So I can't say enough about sort of tenaciously and proactively seeking out mentors.
Yeah, networking is huge. And back to what Chandler first said when we got started, basically like his list of priorities, were being like, I think it was industry or project, location, and then people. The biggest piece of advice that I could give anybody in the recruiting process, after you start, actually, if you're in a summer internship or in a full-time role, it's all about the people that you are surrounding yourself with. They will be the ones to develop you. Your projects and all that will spur from people wanting to work with you. So the networking doesn't stop just at the recruiting process, right? Again, it is, to me, it's like, I can't relate it more to like Tinder and dating. And it's about like a two-way street of being likable, flexible, and building out these relationships with people who not only are in your own affinity groups, because it's great to have those people to support you, but also people who are outside of that, because you want a variety of people to be able to vouch for you in all different areas. If you're struggling in your summer internship, those close people that are maybe in your diversity network or group to be able to basically vouch for you, but also the people who aren't, that can give you maybe more constructive feedback and, helpful criticism to help build you out is really the biggest piece of advice that I could give.
I completely agree. And we have about 10 minutes left in the hour. We may be able to go a little bit late. So I'm going to ask I'm sort of going to speed round through some of these, and I'll ask Mike to maybe shine the spotlight on a couple, particularly good questions, if that would be okay. Maybe a quick question here from Osama. How do MBBs view international experience, for example, experience in markets outside of the US for recruitment into US offices?
Yeah, it's hard, right? So the larger firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG obviously sponsor. You'll find some specialized roles for firms that also provide sponsorship. Basically, it's illegal for any firm to say, we're not going to hire you because you have international experience. So don't worry there. But I would say it's just more difficult because we do have a mass amount of people who are coming internationally that want to work in the US. So we're having to pick and choose, basically, cream of the crop and who we think is going to be most successful. So your chances are still as good as anybody else, I would say.
Yep. Do you need to provide a GMAT GRE score to be recruited at a firm?
Yes. So they'll ask you that on your application.
Yeah. And do MBB firms have a list of target schools?
Absolutely, they do. It's pretty standard. You can always go to their the firm website and you can see exactly the schools that they have relationships with, that they host info sessions with. I will say, because of COVID, they've broadened this out, like in regards to the informational sessions they're doing. It all used to be like live. Chandler, I'm sure you remember this, like having to go to a specific office or a specific school. And now they do these really great open houses. So you can attend these Zoom webinars for actual locations without having to be there, which is really helpful. But yeah.
And one thing I would say is, and as Erica said, it's not that these firms don't hire from other schools, but they might not be their focus area. So let's say you're going to a school that is not on the target list for firm X or office Y. What I would do is go through your school, and actually you could Google, like, let's say I'm at the University of North Carolina and I want to apply to firm X that isn't recruiting UNC grads. I could Google University of North Carolina, McKinsey, find alums from my school that went to the firm that I want to go to and try to reach out to them to see if I could form a relationship with them, and then maybe have them connect me with the recruiting person or whatever. So it's not to say that you can't do it. You might need to do a little creative legwork to find that kind of warm lead. Again, it goes back to my point about mentorship, seeking out someone who is sort of in a similar experience to you that would like to help give you advice and suggestions.
Yep.
Do you need an MBA to get a job in management consulting? How does your career outlook change with a bachelor's versus an MBA?
You absolutely do not need an MBA to get into consulting. Again, I've worked with people who are coming from like a teaching background as an English major. The difference in coming from an undergrad or MBA is the level that you come in at. So entry-level roles are, undergraduates or people with like 1 to 2 years work experience coming right into consulting. And then if you have an MBA, so post MBA, you're coming in, basically at 2 years higher level. So as a consultant, the pay grade is completely different, which is really nice. But you absolutely do not have to have an MBA. In fact, they hire, non-business masters all the time.
Yep. My favorite colleague at BCG did not have an MBA. He had like a master's of philosophy and a master's of divinity. He was super interesting guy with all kinds of backgrounds. Another question, I've heard consulting is a fast-paced industry, but I'm a slow reader, slow learner. Does that alone rule me out from entering the industry?
Absolutely not. So I wouldn't know you're a slow reader, slow learner by having a conversation with you. So going back to what we said, basically the majority of the presentation, it's all about networking and who you know. Make me fall in love with you in a conversation, and I will justify why we should get you through the interview process. The way that you process information, especially in a case interview, that will matter. It's called practice, right? And being able to kind of grow outside of that. I would say the bigger emphasis is on your like analytical skills and capabilities. If you have a hard time like processing information, like from, let's say you're in an interview and your interviewer is asking you questions, processing your thoughts, and then basically spurting it back out. That's something you have to practice. It's not something you can work around in a case interview. Can't make exceptions for that, because that's just a skill set that's necessary for consulting. But I think with practice, if it's literally with reading alone, you can overcome that.
Yep, I would completely agree. How to select a particular company, a firm, when you're doing that, how can you gauge culture and fit?
This is there's many facets to this question. So bringing it back to dating, it's about like meeting people at the firm. So you'll find pretty early on, as you like attend like information sessions or as you're having conversations with people, that each of the firms have a very specific culture fit. For BCG, it's like intellectual curiosity, creativity, like we're more of like the nerds, right? And then like Bain is known for being like really fun and social aspect. So as you meet people, you'll find where you click. And most of the time it's kind of like, you'll know whether or not you're liked there. So I would say the more you integrate yourself with these conversations and with people who are actually doing work at these firms, the more you'll actually know. And it's kind of like an intuitive thing as well. But Chandler, I'm not sure if you recruited for the other firms, but you can speak more about that than I could.
No, I agree with you. And the asterisk that I would put is, while the big firms each have their own sort of reputations, it does vary pretty widely from team to team and office to office. So, I would sort of take that with a grain of salt. But like, when you have the opportunity to connect with a person, either through a recruiting event or through an interview, like, do engage them. Don't ask them questions about themselves, ask them questions about their experience, get to know them. Don't become like a stalker and send them 5 emails afterwards. You definitely don't want to come on too strong, like dating, but getting to know them, getting a vibe, seeing what the connection is, that's sort of different from person to person. But I do go back to that mentorship piece, finding a more senior colleague in the firm that you trust, that you can ask some of these candid questions to. Let's see. I think those are most of the main questions that we have time for. I'm happy to ask one or two more if we have time, but Esther, are there any, I'm sorry, Erica, are there any like parting thoughts that you have, or are there any things that you were hoping to talk about that we didn't get a chance to cover?
Nothing that I don't think that we didn't cover. I want to emphasize just the fact that like maybe some red flags or things to avoid. And then we'll end on a high note with you can give like your best piece of advice. So couple things that you either need to work on or avoid in the recruiting process would be something we've already mentioned, having that bad attitude or more of like a self-centeredness about you. I could tell you, like, if somebody had a bad interaction with me in like the recruiting process, whether it was like face-to-face or whatever, I wouldn't let them through the interviews. So it starts with the actual recruiting team. You know, you have to be willing to like make coffee for the team. You're not better than anybody else. That would be like a huge red flag to recruiters, partners, interviewers, anybody. The unwillingness to take feedback and coachability. See this happen all the time in debriefs with partners, as whether or not this person is coachable or accepted basically the mistakes that that person made. Same thing in internships, right? If somebody, we had somebody that actually sent confidential client info to another client before in a summer internship, and it was a huge legal issue, but that person like owned up to it. They didn't get fired or anything. But those are the kind of big areas where you need to kind of like watch yourself. And then lastly, I would say is like a red flag is attention to detail. You're working on a team. You have to have attention to detail or else the entire team goes under. So again, like sending a confidential client email to a different client, huge error, right? But it is all about how you bounce back from that. So those are some things that I would watch out for and kind of like red flags. Chandler, any like solid piece of advice you want to leave everybody with?
I love that question. I'll do the same. I'll give my sort of speed round, a few answers. First of all, completely agree with attention to detail. Proofread your emails. Do not have spelling errors. Do not get dates wrong. Totally important. One, I would say be nice to everyone in the whole process. I think some people think it's only partners who matter. Like the person answering the phone, the person scheduling your call, like these people all talk. And if you're rude or difficult, that's going to get back. So, and it's just not a nice way to live your life. Like be kind to everyone. Two, prepare for the worst possible question. Like if you have an insecurity, if you have a fear, if you have a weakness, moot that. Like think of a dozen ways to ask a question about that and answers to those questions. It will make you feel more confident going into the interview, knowing that you're prepared for the worst case scenario, and it'll give you a solid answer about that perceived weakness. Ideally, you can turn that perceived weakness into a strength. I would say, you know, what do you do if you bomb a question? This was when I was recruiting for Coca-Cola, but they asked me a question in a Zoom interview or a phone interview, and I just didn't give a very good answer, and I was bothered about it. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know, if this was a work situation, I would write the person an email the next day and say, you know what, when you ask X, I said Y, which was true, but now that I've thought about it, I really should have gone on to say X, Y, and Z. And I just did that with the interviewer. And then they offered me the internship and I took it. And months later, they circled back to say, the way that you handled that less than optimal answer is the thing that pushed you across the line, because we all make mistakes. And it's not about whether or not you occasionally make a mistake, but it's about how you handle it and yourself if you make a mistake. And I have in interviews, I've said, you know, if you have a concern, like I really want to do this, if you offer me the internship, I will take it. If you offer me a full-time job, I will take it. I want you to have all the information that you can. Do you have any concerns about my ability to thrive in this role? And if so, I'd love to give you my best answer to that. If you don't choose me, then you've got perfect information and that's fine. But I'd hate for you not to have that information. And it's a great way to have a really candid conversation. I think we are about out of time. You all are so awesome. It's really great to chat. I want to make sure and check with Mike to see if he has any closing pieces. And also, I do want to say, for those of you that might be interested, a lot of what I've shared has come from sort of the SBC kind of philosophy, and we have a lot of free guides that cover some of this stuff in the context of applying to business school. And we're going to offer free downloads of all of those to anyone that's interested, as well as discounts if anyone's interested. We'll follow more information about that, but wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone. And Mike, what am I missing, or what else should we say in closing?
No, listen, we have some great feedback coming in the chat. Folks have really enjoyed all the information and reviewing both of you, Erica and Chandler, for both providing a lot of really great information, saying this is a great session, very helpful. Big fan of the Be Schooled podcast. So we have some podcast fans out here. Chandler, you are amazing session. So I'm giving you the kudos in case you're not monitoring the chat like I am. I will give you the kudos. And yeah, I'll mention to everyone again, we said at the beginning, but this is a recorded session. We will provide this recording to everybody, and you will get follow-ups from ClearMit about this recording. You'll get follow-ups from Erica at my consulting offer about the services they can provide. And then also with Chandler and the Stacy Blackman Consulting team about the downloads and some of the things that they're offering as well. So you'll definitely hear from everybody. You'll have a way to contact everyone. Apologies for not getting to every single question, but there were so many really good ones. Hopefully we covered, the most general ones that we had. And maybe we'll do this again. It looks like this was fun. So, not to put anyone on the spot, but we'll maybe have one of these again in the future. And hopefully some people can come back and attend again and learn a little bit more as they go through the process a little bit more. So
yeah, I would love that. This is so fun.
This was a total blast. I would love to do it again. Thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. And thanks for everyone who attended. And we will hopefully catch you all at the next one soon. So enjoy the rest of your evening, morning, noon, night, wherever you are in the day.
Yeah.
Get some rest if you're up late. And you'll see that email with the recording later on. So thanks again.
Thanks
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.